Perfect. All right. Well, it's 2:03, so we are going to get started right now. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm very excited to talk to my friend Brianna, Senior Sustainability Consultant at Bureau Veritas. We're going to spend a lot of our conversation talking about assurance, what's expected. I think you, of all the people I know, are actually like, you really pay attention to the CARB webinars. Um, you like really like, and you write notes about them and a lot of great LinkedIn posts about what people need to know. So thank you because they're super boring for me. So I just read your content and then repurpose that as my own. So just so
Yeah.
everybody knows, I just copy paste what Brianna says. But to start off, like tell us what Bureau Veritas is. I think if you know, you know, but most people have no idea what this giant behemoth of a company is. So what is Bureau Veritas and what is the crux of your work there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bureau Veritas is a global publicly traded testing, inspection, and certification company, which encompasses a really broad set of services that I could not come to list all of them right now. But in the sustainability arena, we have a large presence when it comes to helping companies with things like carbon footprinting, life cycle assessments, compliance with regulations like EUDR, CSRD, all of the various sustainability initiatives, we have some expertise over, and we've actually been operating in that space for decades at this point. So, a lot of really great internal resources and experts that I have the privilege of working with every day. And it's so great to be have that global reach, have a global company where I can reach out to, our team members in China or, somewhere in Asia, whatever it might be, to tap into that very specific expertise. So,
How has insurance in this particular industry of sustainability evolved over? I know you haven't been there for decades, you've been there for 5 or so months, but like if Bureau
yeah.
Veritas has been doing this for decades, some of these laws are only hitting right now. What has insurance been like over the course of the last decade? What is the story and where is it today?
Yeah, so greenhouse gas assurance is obviously only recently becoming mainstream as a result of, I would primarily say, regulations like CSRD, but obviously California is kind of taking the lead there when it comes to reporting timelines and the assurance requirements. But companies, there have been, a number of companies that those global behemoth of a company that have been voluntarily reporting on sustainability initiatives and greenhouse gas emissions for, a really long time. And in the name of having credible, accurate, complete information, they've been seeking assurance over those data points. And so, for the majority of us, greenhouse gas assurance is, a new concept or a new thing to add to the compliance checklist. But the assurance process that, we'll chat about today and what we will come to know is very similar to what you would see maybe in a financial auditing process. Not as rigorous because we're not talking about as rigorous of a assurance requirement. We'll chat about limited assurance today, but it's virtually the same type of process that you would go through for financial information. This is just specific to non-financial information, greenhouse gas emissions. So,
Yeah, we're definitely gonna like. I want to really understand what assurance is, what goes through, what you guys do on your end. But I also want to just set the stage here and introduce you a little bit more. The team is growing, and so you are there to like grow the practice further. What is your core focus at Bureau Veritas now that you joined a few months ago?
yeah, absolutely. So I came to Bureau Veritas this past April with a management consulting background in sustainability. So I have been advising our corporate clients on sustainability reporting and strategy. I dabbled a little bit in greenhouse gas assurance before coming to Bureau Veritas, but I would say now my role is twofold. I am still advising companies on sustainability reporting, whether that's voluntary or involuntary, as well as sustainability strategy. What does it look like to have a really mature, advanced sustainability strategy that's rooted in materiality and that is relevant to our stakeholders, whether that be regulators, investors, consumers, whoever your stakeholder base is. So, in addition to wearing my advisory hat, I also wear my auditor hat, which has been fun and a bit of a shift in a role that I'm used to playing. I'm not used to playing kind of, I would say maybe bad cop or putting on my auditor hat, but I have been auditing greenhouse gas inventories since coming on to Bureau Veritas. That is where the majority of our work sits to date, given where the market demand is. And so I have had the pleasure of interacting with all types of companies across all different types of sectors and industries, really trying to understand, how they gathered their greenhouse gas inventory, what carbon accounting looks like for them. And for every company, it's a little different. And we'll chat about that a little bit more today. But I think for me, it's been very helpful to have the advisory background and pair that with, account or auditing over carbon accounting, because if you take just your traditional financial auditor, for example, they may not have the level of understanding that's really necessary when it comes to, where are your largest emission sources, asking those questions like, do you guys own vehicles? What types of air conditioning units do you have? Some of those more intricate questions that we ask as part of our auditing process. That is information that you learn, through the process, but it's really helpful to have that advisory background.
Yeah. Just so everyone knows, there's a chat that's open and there's a Q&A that's open, so you can drop things in there as we go along here. One of the reasons I like talking about the service providers, especially like Beehive is a specialized service provider, we do climate risk. But you, as a more generalist service provider, you have to adapt to the market really quickly, and you can as a more generalist person
Mhm.
because wherever, and you even said that's where the market is right now is around insurance. How would you describe how you've adapted in between the two roles that you've had, but also like what your colleagues are saying as these service providers, like where has the market moved away from and where do you think it's moving towards based on what's happened over the last year?
Yeah, so when I started my career into sustainability, which transparently was about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, we were still very much so in the voluntary reporting space. So reporting in alignment or in accordance with GRI, throw in some UN SDGs into your report, really just trying to put together a really nice marketing material ultimately, of a sustainability report that had some substance when it came to things like metrics and targets, and really incorporating some of those more concrete numbers like greenhouse gas emissions. That is where I started, and I learned a ton on voluntary reporting. And in the voluntary reporting space, because it's voluntary, virtually anything flies, right? You can say whatever you like, you can, within reason, obviously, but as long as you have some type of process documented where you feel like you can, support the claims that you're making in your report, in your annual sustainability report, no questions are really going to be asked. We're moving into a space today where regulation is starting to take hold, right? When we think of CSRD, for example, and the idea of getting your double materiality assessment assured, that's kind of like a brand new thing in the sustainability world. It's like, well, how do you assure that I conducted my materiality assessment
It's such
in
a
accordance?
qualitative thing. Yeah.
Right. And the guidance is, fairly open and can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. So, um, that was definitely a big thing when CSRD was proposed. And obviously now there's, a number of updates that I can hardly keep up with. But um, we also seen, proposals at the SEC level to report on climate risks. And so, in the absence of those regulations, we're seeing states like California step in and start to require those disclosures really from an investor perspective, recognizing that the marketplace that we exist in, this capital market that we live in, and thrive from, require accurate, complete, reliable information. And that's really where the heart of California's regulation sits, is providing investors and other stakeholders with reliable climate related data, because there is a monetary value that can be associated with things like natural disasters, for example. So, Yeah, definitely a shift, even in the last, 4 or 5 years, which is very short, from involuntary very quickly to a voluntary landscape
Well, I
or
think what's crazy about the
voluntary
last four or
movement.
5 years, and specifically if you narrow in the last 12 months, is 4 years ago, these things that are laws now are bills. There are
Mhm.
proposals or they were even ideas. Like they weren't even close to passing as law. The California law passed in October 2023. That was 2 years ago. And then it's only finally being implemented for the first time in 4 months with carbon emissions 8 months later or whatever. So like it changed from voluntary to involuntary or to mandatory really quickly, but also specifically in the Trump era and everything that's happened in the last 8 months, I think what's gone away is this like sustainability advantage, this marketing advantage that's happened. And I was speaking with a big top law firm ESG partner earlier this morning, and I was telling her that this particular webinar we were doing, I was like, it's actually one of our top signed up for webinars. And I was wondering why that is. I was like, in my mind, assurance, God, how boring. I know Brianna's lovely, but like, why are there so many registrants? And we were basically riffing and saying that over the last 8 months, so many sustainability professionals lost their jobs. And if you kept your job, your peer lost their job at another company, your boss lost their job, and you were just given all the work, your budget was cut. And so we are all looking for something that is as quantitative, as real, as tangible, as tied to traditional business processes as possible. And I think that's why assurance gets so much interest, whether people would acknowledge that on its face or not, because it's real. Your CFO knows what assurance is. This is the process that they've gone through since they were an intern, uh, in college, all the way through their job now. They always got assurance, and so the reason I think people are particularly sustainability professionals are particularly I don't know, it's excited for assurance is the right thing, but they're grasping onto it as like a really important part of this job is because it is something that they can share with the rest of their organization in the rest of the organization's language and in like their way of doing things.
Yeah, and I think it really shifts the conversation from we can make a disclaimer in our, annual sustainability report to, oh crap, we need to really put some rigor behind our data collection processes. Who are the data owners? Do we have the right people reviewing this data, checking this data? These are, to your point, sustainability functions are pretty strapped for cash, right? We
Hmm.
don't have a ton of resources in the sustainability realm, at least most organizations. There certainly are organizations that are blessed in that area, but you're working with a really constrained budget, and a lot of people in this practice are kind of voluntold to move into this role, and so they may not have the formal background or education on carbon accounting or some of those more technical things. They're just being asked to do it, and so that's definitely assurance being a compliance requirement. Everybody's ears perk up and they're like, oh no, we need to really figure out what we're doing here and make sure we have the right people in the right
Yeah.
seats.
I mean, even across BI customers, I'd probably guess, I should look this up, half has somebody with an ESG or sustainability title and the other half just made it legal or finance's job. And even the half that has sustainability as a title, I guess like 80% of those are, I don't use the word qualified, but I'd say like have a technical background or
Right.
like either a degree in this stuff or worked at a large consulting firm, whereas a bunch of others are just like really excited about it, learned what they could, and moved over from some random operations role to the sustainability thing because they were excited. So like just the
Yeah.
number of people in house with the specific knowledge of GHG protocol and carbon accounting or the categories of emissions or what emissions factors are and the ability to debate and switch them out and whatever is
Mhm.
not a high percentage. And so if we're going to have these laws separate from are these laws good or bad, like if we're going to have these laws, everyone needs to have the same approach so that the numbers are the same across the board. And that's where assurance can come in. I want to ask you a maybe silly question.
Mhm.
Define assurance.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we chat about assurance, we typically use the terms assurance and verification interchangeably. And they are fairly interchangeable. Assurance is what we provide over a statement. So, for example, you state that your emissions are 800 metric tons in scope one, something for scope two. We assure that statement. We conduct verification over the data that supports that statement. So you can think of verification as the activities that we execute in order to provide the assurance ultimately. So when we are talking about limited assurance specifically, the result of a limited assurance engagement is our assurance opinion, which basically is a negative declaration that we did not find any, misconformities, misstatements, nonconformities that would indicate that the values that we're assuring are inaccurate. So, as part of that process, we would review a set of locations that are reflective of the organization's operational footprint. So, for example, if you have manufacturing facilities, maybe they're offshore, you have some warehousing and distribution facilities, maybe you have some sales offices in the States, scattered about Europe, wherever your operational footprint might be, we would take a representative sample set. And virtually conduct our limited assurance over that sample set. And literally what we're doing is we're ticking and tying the data that you've reported to some type of source evidence. So where possible, we would want to review some primary data. Where primary data is not available, we would look at your assumptions, see if your assumptions are reasonable, if they make sense. So yeah, long-winded answer of all of that to say assurance is the process of assuring a specific statement or providing an opinion over a specific statement that an organization makes.
With something, we're going to talk about greenhouse gas emissions first, because that's where it's required, and then I'll move over to climate risk in a bit. With
Yep.
something like carbon emissions, just been around for like 20-ish years, but compare that to like double entry bookkeeping, which has been around since the Venetian merchants 500 years ago, which is a relatively novice thing. People are still using different emissions factors. Some use a free EPA calculator online, if that even still
Mhm.
exists.
Mhm.
Others specifically love CEDA or love IEIO or whatever that thing is called. Like everyone's got some different things here. Do you judge, how deeply do you judge or critique or base your assurance on like what emissions factors they used or where they source these things? Or is there a lot of flexibility in saying, that's fine if EPA said this on their free online calculator, like I guess that's a good start.
Yeah. So we dive into all of the details. We look at what emission factors are you using? Are those applied to the right types of emission sources? Sometimes there's issues that we find where an inappropriate emissions factor is applied and maybe it doesn't result in a material difference in your inventory, but from a best practices perspective, it's, an improvement opportunity. So as we go through our assurance process, and I always like to talk about this because before I was, really part of this process, you kind of view assurance as like a, you know, kind of standoffish thing. It's a little scary. You want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row, which you certainly do. But, with my clients, when I'm going through this assurance process, it's a very collaborative approach. You provide me with, your latest and greatest inventory for the year in which we're assuring. And if we find some issues, we chat about them and you can correct them, right? Like we can't provide advice or how we would recommend updating them because that would be a conflict of interest and we need to, ensure we have no perception of a conflict of interest there. But we will identify things like, hey, this emissions factor is inappropriately used, or maybe there was, you fat fingered a data entry, there's a data entry error, you added a zero, or maybe you added something you shouldn't have. Those are all findings that we document as part of our assurance process, and we share them back with you. We want to make sure that your inventory is the best and most reflective inventory that it can be of your emission sources. So it's not like three strikes, you're out. It's here's our log of issues. More mature organizations will have less issues where, companies who haven't gone through this a number of times may have, a longer list and those are things that they can work through.
And
But
do I
it's
need to fix all my issues before you like write that letter for me? Or is there a conversation of like, all right, cool, fair points. I'll fix them next year. Please write the letter for this year.
Yeah, so their only requirement to update or to correct an issue is if it surpasses our materiality threshold. So our materiality threshold is 5% per emission source. And so if you have, say, maybe you entered the wrong amount of therms or something for natural gas, and that would result in more than 5%, a more than 5% difference in your total inventory value. That would be a corrective action that you would need to take to update. If it did not result in more than 5%, that's ultimately management's discretion to make the update or not, but we would log it and share it with you as a finding from our engagement.
Got it. Um, so for these particular laws, let's talk about SB 253.
Yeah.
What is the timeline of the assurance rollout? And when it moves from limited to reasonable, what changes and what I'm supposed to provide to you as a client?
Yeah, so in case the audience has not heard, CARB proposed June 30th of 2026 for their first, for organization's first emissions report over the previous fiscal year. And that should include your limited assurance statement. So virtually, spoiler, if you haven't started looking at any assurance providers or haven't started that process of what assurance would look like, getting your ducks in a row, I would definitely recommend starting that now. That proposal goes in front of CARB's board in December, and we will know whether or not it's been approved, hopefully by the end of the year. So with that being said, limited assurance is required over scope 1 and 2 starting in 2026 all the way through 2029, or all the way through, I guess, 2028, in which 2029 you would be required to obtain reasonable assurance over scope 1 and 2 and limited assurance over scope 3. So it's basically 2026 and 2030 are your important years to remember. But if I remember correctly, that reasonable assurance proposal is also under review and subject to CARB's board approval. And so remains to be seen if reasonable assurance will, stay in the law, but that is what has been drafted and proposed to date.
Got it. And so what is the difference if I'm getting, let's say that all happens in 2030, I have to get reasonable assurance on that. What does the standard go up? Do you have a bigger sample size of data so you just might find more issues? What do I need to provide you that's different? What should I be thinking about of like, what do I need to prepare differently or better or more transparently to be able to pass that limited assurance test?
Yeah. So limited assurance is just as it sounds, limited in nature. So again, we would sample a relatively small set of locations, again, that are going to be reflective of your operational footprint. When we move to reasonable assurance, it becomes much more comprehensive of a review. So our sample size will increase. So to your point, we may find additional errors or issues that we log. We also are going to be taking a more comprehensive look at your data management processes, your internal controls. Those are things that we do as part of limited assurance, but I would say it's more of a light touch. And so when we are in a reasonable assurance engagement, we are discussing pretty detailed and comprehensively with data owners or whoever is involved in the data management collection process, what that process looks like. We want to make sure we understand data flows. It's part of reasonable assurance as well, depending on the standard that you're utilizing. Site visits are typically required. So we would do an on-site audit virtually, where we would do an on-site audit, not virtually, where we would chat with the the data owners. Maybe we would talk to some operations folks, understand how some of the process emissions are documented or captured, if there's some systems that they're utilizing there. It would be a much more intense review of your sample set of your emissions than what we're seeing with limited assurance.
Yeah.
So your second question, though, some of the data that you'll need. So when we chat about limited assurance, again, we are going to request evidence source data for the sample set that we've identified. So that's going to be things like utility bills, natural gas, electricity bills. If you own a fleet, we're going to want to look at, logs of vehicle mileage, or if you have maybe fleet purchase cards where you can, purchase gas, we'll want those receipts. Any type of emission source that we're capturing in our review, in our sample set, we would require source evidence of. And if you don't have source evidence, we would move to reviewing the assumptions that you've utilized and, basically agree with the assumptions that you've utilized, indicate that they're reasonable. And if not, we would
Mhm.
chat about, maybe some changes that would make the methodology more accurate and reflective of, true nature.
Yeah. Lauren asked a really good question here that I think is great. Do you have advice for companies and consultants about how to specifically prepare documentation before an audit around limited assurance so that everything is ready for an auditor to review? And I'm curious if you could also speak to that about like what your experience of like receiving information and how it's different if somebody did this with a consultant and spreadsheets more traditionally
Mhm.
or using software? What is the difference in what you get and how easy it is, or what the time it takes is, and all that?
Yeah. Yeah, Lauren, to answer your question specifically, documentation is the name of the game. So the more you can document clearly and concisely, the better off both parties will be, the company receiving assurance and the company providing assurance. So the best place that I would recommend starting with is going to be an inventory management plan. EPA has a really free, nice template on their website if you are looking for something to reference or just pull down and use directly. But the IMP is the basis for our understanding of your inventory, right? It's going to detail your emission sources, your boundaries, um, where your data is being pulled from, how often the data is being reviewed or checked, the emission sources that you're using, the global warming potentials that you're using, conversions, all of the things that we would be checking as part of our assurance process are going to be documented in the inventory management plan. And that's the first thing that we ask for in an engagement. And if you don't have one, it's the first thing that we log on our issues log as an improvement opportunity. Um, so yes, the more
Improvement
documentation, the
opportunity is such a lovely way of saying you're really bad at this. You got to get better. That's
corrective
so nice.
action. Yes, yes, you can
Corrective
improve
action.
here. Yeah. So I would certainly recommend for those of you who do not have an inventory management plan, that is like number one on the list where you can
Mhm.
start because it's basically just a checklist of figuring it all out. It will help you walk through, okay, establish our boundaries, identify our emission sources, understand data owners, all of those really core principles to putting together an inventory. Your second question was around Excel-based spreadsheet versus
Yeah,
carbon
versus
accounting
software. Yeah.
platform. Yeah, so we have a plethora of clients that utilize one or the different options. So some organizations opt to utilize an Excel spreadsheet that maybe a third party created for them. Maybe they're utilizing the EPA spreadsheet. Maybe they've built a spreadsheet in-house. I have a client who did that. We're reviewing their inventory. It's actually really well put together, had to require many, 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 many hours to build all of that logic into their inventory, their Excel-based inventory. But Excel-based option is number one. There is no problem with that. Um, whatever works best for the organization. If that's managing all of that data in a spreadsheet, then, more power to you. But as you begin to work with more global companies, you'll see movement towards a carbon accounting platform. And typically it's automated in the sense of utilities are automated. So, cuts out a bit of the data, the manual data entry there. Um,
Is that helpful to you because you're able to say, they say the scope two emissions from this office is 1,000. Why is that? Click a button, it goes straight to the bill instead of like opening up Google Drive? Or is that helpful to you because they're less likely to have made a mistake if it was extracted from the bill and uploaded, and so there's like a level of like there's no fat fingering involved. Like, why is that helpful
yeah,
to you?
I think I think if anything, it's more helpful for the client for the organization that's gathering the inventory because it's automated. For me, it doesn't, one way or the other. I will say it's about the same time. I'm going to go in and fish,
Mm.
an invoice maybe manually in my file explorer that the client shared versus maybe I can just find it in the platform. I think the time saving is on the client side. So when it comes to us saying, hey, we want to sample, sites 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, provide all of the source documentation. The client doesn't have to go through all of their manual folders and say, here you go. They can say, well, it's all in our carbon accounting platform, and I'll grant you view only access, and you can go and fetch it that way. So it's a much more streamlined process on their end, assuming all of the data is incorporated, or excuse me, all of the invoices and evidence data is incorporated into that software.
Yeah. So it sounds like I used to sell carbon accounting software. And our spiel was get out of spreadsheets, move into software, you'll make fewer mistakes, the audit trail will be clear, assurance will be easier. It sounds like what you're
Yep.
saying is the first things could be true. Like it could be true that you might make fewer mistakes. It could be true that it'll be a little bit faster, a little bit more organized. But it's not necessarily true that like just because you're on a carbon accounting software, assurance is guaranteed, certainly, or even necessarily easier or faster.
I would say it's, the amount of time, the differential between the two is negligible from an assurance provider perspective. We need to look at all of it anyway. We're not just, say for example, maybe your carbon accounting solution provider shared their SOC 2 report with us. That's great, but we still need to verify for ourselves. We still need to make sure you're utilizing the latest and greatest or the most appropriate emissions factors. We need to understand the conversions that the software is using. So we're still checking all of the things regardless of where they sit, Excel or a platform.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I want to get your perspective on SB 261 now, which is not about carbon emissions, but it's something you and I have talked a lot about. And we've talked a lot about the phrase a good enough risk assessment or good faith effort. I think in Europe, similar laws have say something like don't go through any undue effort.
Mhm.
I'm curious when you guys talk internally, how would you define what good enough means or what good faith means in the short term? And I also want to hear your perspective on like how will that evolve over time? Like it makes perfect sense that California, with a hostile federal government, is saying, well, like we're going to pass these laws. We're super proud of ourselves. I interviewed Sydney Burgess last week, the lead regulator at CARB, and she was lovely and very optimistic
Mhm.
and chipper. Actually, somebody gave me feedback yesterday that we were too casual, and that we should have been more serious about this. And I don't know, whatever. Here we are. But the point is, and I think she's very proud, and CARB is very proud, and California is very
Yeah.
proud that they're putting these laws forward. But they're also aware that there's like it's a weird time in the world, and while they want
Mhm.
people to follow the law, they don't want to be seen as these like out of touch bad guys. And so they're trying to say, hey, give me some like, don't be a lazy kid. Give me something to go off
Mhm.
of here. And if it's not good enough, I'm not gonna fine you, but I might tell you that. But I do also expect that to change over time.
Yeah.
So, long-winded way of saying, what does good faith effort look like in your perspective in SB 261? And then how do you think that'll change in 2 years?
Yeah. Well, I think good news. We don't have to rely on my interpretation of what a good faith effort is because CARB released their minimum reporting requirements checklist 2 days ago. So you can find that on CARB's website. Also posted on my LinkedIn if you'd like to go and look there for a quick view. But yeah, so in terms of CARB's view of a good faith effort, they've provided like what is the bare minimum you can do basically. And I would say it's all, pretty well aligned with what I would expect. Describe your governance processes, describe your risk management processes as all of these things relate to climate, obviously. And then they excluded the requirement to report your greenhouse gas emissions in your first TCFD aligned report. Um, to me, though, a good faith effort, I think if you align your approach in your reporting with the TCFD framework, whether that's IFRS S2, TCFD 2017 version, whatever it is, that they're all getting to the same principles of the information. describing it's virtually a comply or explain law, right? If you don't have any governance or risk management processes over climate related issues, you can say that, right? We do not have any
Mhm.
board members that, have a climate background. We are not currently managing or assessing this, right? You can say all of those things. It probably won't look great because your peers are not saying those same things, but technically you could say we don't have any of these things and explain why you don't have them and talk about, your plan moving forward to put them in place. But I think if you align with the TCFD at its most basic level, to me, you've put in the effort to really attempt to implement some type of climate awareness in your organization, right? Like most boards to date do not have any background on sustainability
Mhm.
or climate. Most management level, C-suite level executives do not have much awareness on this. This is really an effort, I would say, kind of, grounds up, roots up type of approach where it's employees asking, it's maybe more of your middle line people in your organization saying, hey, this is kind of a passion project for me. Let's put some initiatives in place. Let's understand what sustainability could look like here at our organization. Um, so yeah, I think, having the conversation internally and really just trying to put your best effort forward in assessing what those risks are, right? And in order to assess our risks, we have to conduct a climate risk assessment. And that has to be done thoroughly. It can't just be done as a check the box type of exercise and then, as you like to say, put it on the shelf and never look at it again. It needs to be thorough and it needs to be reliable. And then taking steps towards mitigating those risks, right? Like if we identify fires are a hazard for our California-based employees, what can we do to help mitigate that issue that we identified, which is material to our business, by the way. So it's
Yeah.
having those conversations and being honest about here's the issues. How can we actually put resources, time, and effort and money towards mitigating what these issues are?
Yeah, I agree with the assessment. I think for this year, if you like really didn't give a damn about any of this stuff, and you just wanted to follow the law and move on with your life, TCFD is very straightforward. Four sections, 11 questions. Does your board have oversight? You say either no if it really doesn't, or honestly, you can get away with saying yes as long as you've shown your board some version of a risk assessment, some version of a plan. Does management have oversight? Same thing, ditto. How did you conduct a scenario assessment? If you don't want to pay for anything, you go to the free tools from FEMA, from WRI, drop in a couple of offices and say, I looked up drought risk using the WRI aqueduct tool to all my offices. And I intend on getting better next year. Like there is a way of doing this that is really easy and costs you $0. There are
Hmm.
ways of doing this that are really, really intense and cost you a lot of money. There's ways of doing this like Beehive, which is a blend of like it's really whatever. Like there's ways of doing this that doesn't break the bank or take a lot of
No.
time. But I think most interestingly is what will happen in 2 years on your next reporting cadence. I think at that point, if you are not growing at all, if your scenario analysis hasn't improved, if you did do a good job this time, and you said in your example, wildfire risk is a material issue because it impacts employee health and safety and costs us X amount of money, and then you showed zero progress on mitigating that at all, I actually don't think California is going to fine you because all California is asking for the disclosure. I think
Hmm.
investors are going to say, "What the hell? We
Hmm.
expected to see like you pointed this out as an issue. Hello, like have you done anything?" Or investors are going to say, "Hey, last time you didn't really do anything. That was fine. It was your first try. Whatever. You still didn't do anything. Like we just want to know if wildfires in California or hurricanes in Florida are a big deal for you. Do something about it." So I think it'll grow in that direction.
Yeah.
Um, Really quickly, I dropped in the chat. We do this every single Thursday at 2 p.m. Next week, we're doing a networking hour. So come sign up. I'll kind of drop you in a Zoom room with somebody I've met before, and that'll be great. The week after that is a Beehive product demo. So you get to chat with me for an hour. I just show you the whole product. And then in a couple weeks, we're interviewing Simone Wren, who is the ESG lead at New Relic, and is honestly a badass. And I love her about how New Relic is building their sustainability strategy. So check those out. Cheyenne here asked a question. Could you share the typical timeline for completing an audit from initiation to when you're ready to report on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the timeline is going to vary depending on how large the organization, but we typically work from anywhere 4 to 8 weeks. Again, if we're talking like thousands of locations, we're moving closer to like 10 weeks or so. But for most of the companies that we're working with, which, I would say are sitting in the Fortune 500, we can complete the audit in roughly 6 weeks. This is also going to depend on the number of issues that we identify, right? So if there's a number of errors or maybe just some improvements that you can make to your inventory that we've identified, you're welcome to make those updates, and then we would, review those updates and ensure that they're accurate. But all of that is just going to add time to the timeline. So the more firmed up, clear, concise, transparent your inventory and your documentation is, the quicker we can execute our work.
Yeah, helpful. Gonna have you speak to the market a little bit and your competitors, but how would you advise companies think about who to work with here? Like, what is the, I don't know,
Yeah.
differentiator between different insurance companies? I imagine there's some level of credibility. That's why you might use Bureau Veritas or EY and not like, Sally out of WeWork somewhere. But between BV and EY, who would you use? And also, let's be clear, like if someone's your accounting provider, they can't be your insurance person. So you got to put
Yeah.
a Chinese firewall between that stuff. Like, what is the difference between different insurance companies? And am I picking someone who's, besides on cost, like, is there better? Is there faster? Is there more credible or less credible? Like, what is the decision matrix I might go through if I'm picking an insurance provider?
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, it comes down to how much experience does your assurance provider have? Asking for things as part of your, RFP process or your vendor selection process, asking for things like case studies or references or examples of other, assurance statements that have been provided. Maybe some of them are public. For example, you can go and look up, a plethora of Bureau Veritas's public limited assurance statements, for the various companies that we've conducted assurance against, because those are typically, posted in an annual sustainability report or uploaded to CDP or something of the sort. I think it comes down to expertise, credibility, and does your assurance provider have the understanding of your business operations? Are you, for example, we just conducted assurance over a large food and ag company that had emissions related to manure and wastewater. If you're working with somebody who does not have experience doing those things, it's going to be a really rough time for them to understand your methodology, how emissions were gathered, the source evidence. It's just going to be a bit of a learning curve. And so my recommendation is always to ask, what references do you have, just generically, but also within my industry specifically, if there's any you can share case studies. And then I think it comes to, it's a business decision when we bring in the financial auditor to potentially conduct greenhouse gas assurance, right? So CSRD, for example, there are some, national states in the EU that require that your statutory auditor actually audits your double materiality assessment and all of your CSRD sustainability statements. And, when it comes to California conducting limited assurance over your greenhouse gas inventory, that's really a management business decision around, do we want our, statutory auditor to also audit our greenhouse gas emissions? When you're talking about, some of the larger global accounting firms, there's going to be a price differential that you'll see between somebody in the, financial accounting world as compared to a Bureau Veritas, where we have traditionally always done non-financial accounting, and that's or non-financial accounting assurance, and that's where expertise sits. For some of those larger accounting firms, their expertise sits in financial accounting, right? So sometimes it makes sense to divide church and state, but sometimes it doesn't, depending on what the business, really requires.
Yeah. Um, And feel free to ask questions if there's anything left here. One of the things I want to begin to wrap up on is kind of the direction you see this going. We talked a lot about assurance. We said that's where the market is right now. Many companies who haven't gotten assurance in the past are beginning to do so right now. Um, but that's not all you are interested in. And that is not all the market it needs.
Mhm.
So, can you speak a little bit to outside of just providing assurance on emissions? What are other services that you want to be serving? Where do you think the market has some gaps that somebody like Bureau Veritas could be filling?
Yeah. Absolutely. So outside of our traditional greenhouse gas assurance, we also provide, again, a really long list of sustainability services from the most general side of things like sustainability reporting, which I can help with, all the way through to very specific compliance requirements, maybe like EU forestation requirements or very specific sustainability related initiatives that um, companies require, they need to comply with, or maybe it's a certification that they need to achieve. So we have a really large plethora of, services, but specifically, I have been advising corporates on sustainability report, all things sustainability reporting. So I have done my fair share of gathering greenhouse gas inventories, conducting climate risk assessments, helping with the data collection process
Mhm.
when it comes to reporting in accordance with GRI, evaluating what SDGs make sense to include on your sustainability report, reporting to CDP, reporting to EcoVadis, the whole slew of sustainability reporting, I'll call it, are things that I have fortunately have had exposure and experience with over the last 4 years. And so that's where, my team specifically can support. But if there's something, in the realm of sustainability that you need help with, I'm happy to, and I didn't chat about here, I'm happy to, route those questions to our team members. I will say too, I didn't mention Bureau Veritas is a French-based company, so our headquarters is in France. A lot of our, really deep expertise team members who have been with us for years are in Europe. Our company is almost 200 years old. We'll be 200 years old in 2028. So there's again a really long list of all of the services and expertise that I am still wrapping my head around because I've only been here for 4 months or 5 months. But it's honestly such a vast team member network that we have that I know I can count on somebody to figure out a question that I have.
Wow, 200 years old. That's impressive. Um, we had a couple questions come in here. Ethan asked, good question actually. What requirements has CARB set for assurance firms? Is accreditation with a certain organization mandated? Like, can I
Yeah.
start offering assurance or do I need a special stamp of approval from somebody?
Yeah, great question. So, CARB proposed in their most recent workshop a few weeks back, I think it was 4 or 5 different assurance standards that your assurance provider can conduct assurance against. Um, for the financial firms, for example, they would abide to AICPA as a result of being a CPA firm. Bureau Veritas and others like us would utilize the ISO 1464 family to conduct our assurance against. They are I'll say across all of them, they're very similar in the assurance requirements that as an auditor we would need to follow. Um, can anybody become an assurance provider? The regulation, I believe, proposed in the webinar or in the workshop a couple of weeks back indicated that you have to be able to demonstrate, I forget the specific terminology, but knowledge, expertise, credibility in this area specifically. So I guess you couldn't just spin up an assurance practice right now and start offering assurance because you don't have,
Probably for the best.
yeah, that expertise and knowledge and experience under your belt. But CARB indicated that they are looking towards the existing marketplace of independent third-party assurance providers to conduct assurance. And are not requiring CARB verified assurance providers. So for those of you who don't know, CARB has within the state has mandatory greenhouse gas emissions reporting for various other entities. Those entities that fall in scope for that specific regulation, which I think is from a number of years back, have to have their values, their greenhouse gas emissions values assured by a CARB accredited verifier. To get that verification requires a very specific process to apply and demonstrate expertise. Again, that is not being required for Senate Bill 253. And so you can use, Bureau Veritas, you can use your financial auditor, for example. I would recommend, again, to start having those conversations with the various assurance providers and really shopping the market, seeing what the cost differentials are across the different providers.
Yeah. And Charlie asked a question that's a very advanced question. I don't know. Does the EUDR regulation require verification of the plot polygons data when reported by companies, or is a geospatial address enough? Any idea?
Great question. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I definitely can forward that along to our EUDR group. And I'm sure they can provide a very snappy answer for you that I cannot provide here. Sorry.
Perfect. We'll get back to you on the polygons and all other shape related questions. Um, Cool. Well, Brianna, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing
Yeah.
this. I always learn a lot chatting with you. Again, Brianna is awesome on LinkedIn. So check her out. She posts a lot of these updates very quickly. She is on it. And if you need assurance, give Vivi a call. But I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Hope to see you guys in the next couple of weeks. And a couple final notes. If anyone's coming to Workiva Amplify next week in DC, I'll be there. Come say hello. And if you are coming to New York Climate Week, join Brianna and I for a party on Wednesday, the 24th, a Beehive party. You can send me an email. I'll tell you where that is. Thank you all very much. I appreciate you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye, guys.
Bye.